So we'll get started. This is the second part of Fidius Ciceronis. So still on the first reading. This is a continuation. So if you haven't watched yesterday's video, please make sure that you do that before you watch this one. So we're looking at the second half of the story. Okay, so just a friendly reminder. In the first part of the story, we're really focusing in on the fact that Cicero and his wife have had a son. They're very excited about having a son. They already had a daughter. Okay, she was about 14 or 15 when Cicero's son is born, so they're really jazzed about having a baby boy. Okay, and so we pick that up here, right? So magnopere, which kind of looks like magnus, right? That is an adverb. It's the adverb form of magnus. So magnus means great. Magnopere means greatly. Greatly might not be the best translation every single time, so just keep that in mind. We might need to tweak that in our English. Cicero here is my subject, and then we get a very interesting verb, laetatus est. It is third person singular. It is perfect, but it is a deponent verb. Okay, deponent verbs, those are those verbs that look like they're passive, but they're actually active. And you get a string of these in Latin where they start their life as an adjective, right? So laetus means happy, and then it sort of morphs into a deponent verb. So there's really no difference in saying Cicero laetus erat. Here they've just used the verb and it becomes laetatus est, okay? And I think the idea is if you just say laetus, you're happy. Laetatus est is you were made happy. You became happy. And I think that's where the deponent nature of it comes in, because it has this passive kind of look to it. So Cicero was filled with happiness, right, would be the idea here. Or we could just say he was glad, he was rejoicing. Magnopere, he was, greatly rejoicing. That kind of sounds like translationese to me. So I want you guys to get in the habit of making sure that you translate these in the way that we would say it in English. So Cicero was happy, magnopere. Cicero was really happy. He was super happy. He was really excited. Anything like that will do for me. Okay. This word cum here, we see it. We have to decide if it's the with kind of a cum or if it's the clause kind of a cum. And the very next word is ad, which is another preposition. So that's making me think that this is that conjunction cum. Ad, of course, is a preposition. It takes the accusative case. Okay. In tablino, ablative of. Okay. A tablinum, if you know what a tablinum is, it's a study. So if he's in tablino, he's in his study. So I think we would call this an ablative of place, right? Or ablative place where. That one's for you, Alice. Okay. Then the very next word we get here is sedentem. Okay, so first thing we should notice about it is that it is in the accusative case, obviously. Okay, think about what kind of a word sedentem is. Okay, sedeo, sedere is a verb, but sedentem, this is the Blue's Clues moment. Okay, think about it, think about it. Yes. Mark, what are you doing here? 8th grader coming out of nowhere. Mark, you wanted to know about participles. So here you go, okay? Sedentem's a participle. So it's describing that guy as sedentem in tablino. What's he doing, Mark? He's sitting in his study, right? And notice the order, right? Here he is, illum. Then you get sedentem, him sitting in his study is in the middle. Okay, and that's how participles work. But it's still accusative. We don't really have a subject yet, and we don't get our subject until down here when we get ancilla quaedam. So ancilla is my subject. Okay, the word quaedam works like qui quad. Okay, so the form of the word is actually the front part of the word. Quidam means a certain, right? So a certain man would be quidam, a certain woman would be quaedam. If this were in different cases, you might see cuius dam or cuidam, so it behaves like qui quad. So Cicero was really happy. cum. Remember, we talked about this yesterday. Third singular. Perfect. Right. Cum has all of those different meanings like an ablative absolute, so when is always a good default one to start with and see how that works. So he was really happy when, and that one's pretty much going to work here. When what happened, right? I got to skip over ad illum. I got to skip over the whole in tablino sedentem part because I need a subject first. He was really happy when an ancilla quaedam, when a certain I don't want to say handmaid. That has a very different meaning these days. A certain servant, a housemaid kind of thing. Yeah, housemaid. What's good, Johnny? When a certain housemaid acessit. Cato means to go. Okay. Cato means to go towards. So we could think of acessit to be approach. Okay. When a certain handmaid, certain housemaid, approached. Now, approached ad illum. Acessit has an odd built into it, but in Latin you still have to have another odd. So don't translate the second one. Don't say approached to him. Right? Either you could say that this handmaiden went towards him, or you can say approached him. So depending on your translation of acessit, you might not be translating that word odd, right? Because it's already kind of built in. So a certain housemaid approached him, illum, that guy, right? Illum can also just be that man or just him, simply. Approached him, sedentem in tablino. Literally approached the sitting in his study man, right? But in better English, approached him sitting in his study, or we could say approached him while he was sitting in his study. So with participles, you can add a little extra business to them to make them sound a little bit smoother in English, okay? It's perfectly fine to say approached him sitting in his study. Just make sure you know it's Cicero that's sitting in his study, not the handmaid, okay? And I know that because this is accusative, and this is accusative. So she, the nominative, approached him, the accusative, while he, accusative, was sitting in his study. So the handmaiden, God, I hate that word now, approached him while he was sitting in his study. This que here means and. Hilari voltu, just based on cases. Those are both in the ablative case. We get welle, which is an infinitive. We get se, which is accusative. We get aliquid, another accusative. And we get dicere, which is an infinitive. So when you start seeing accusatives, infinitives like we talked about today, your brain should be going to indirect statement. We don't know it for a fact until we get our main verb here, which is significavit, right? Third person, singular, perfect. A signum is a sign or a signal. So significare, it can mean to mean something, but here we want that basic meaning of it, to signal. So she approached him while he was sitting in his study, and she signaled hilari voltu, ablative of, I wouldn't even think about what it is, but description, right? Hilari voltu is a happy face. So maybe you could even think of it by means. She signaled with her happy face. She signaled by a happy face. Yeah. She signaled. How did she signal? With her happy face. Let's go with that. Okay. And I'm sure you could argue it some other different use of the ablative, but for all intents and purposes, she had a happy face. Okay. So she signaled with a happy face. She signaled what? I have accusatives and I have infinitives, and I have a verb like signal. So there's a word in English that can come after a verb, a word like signal. You signal to someone that. Okay? She signaled with a happy face that Wella se aliquid dicere. We have two infinitives and we have two accusatives. Okay, when you have this situation, word order can sometimes help. Sometimes you just got to go based on context. I would look at the two infinitives first. You have wella and dicere. Wella means to want to. Dicere means to say. So I'm thinking that wella here is the infinitive, right? Dicere is the complementary infinitive. She signaled that se, and we should know the reflexive se, she signaled that she, the handmaiden, she signaled that she, wella, wanted dicere to say aliquid. She wanted to say something. So typically you get the subject accusative first, the se, then you get the accusative direct object, aliquid, and then you get your infinitives. So I could easily see that wella moving to the end there after dicere, but when you're reading real stuff or things that are adapted from real Latin, sometimes the words are not going to go in the order that the textbook sort of teaches you. Okay, so this is an indirect statement. Notice the main verb here, significavit, she signaled. So because that's in the past, it's going to pull the whole sentence into the past. So she signaled that she wanted to say something. We can't have that, even though it's a present infinitive, we can't translate it in the present. We can't say she signaled that she wants to say something. She signaled that she wanted to say something. And she did that probably with her big old smile. Okay? And then we get to this word, anus. For the life of me, I can't understand why, but it is the Latin word for an old woman. So unfortunate. And we get our verb here, erat. So when you have the verb erat and you've got this predicate nominative kind of a situation, you could say the old woman was wise. The old woman was prudanes. I mean, one of the meanings that you might find for prudanes would be like discerning. I mean, that's not a great English word, but I think the idea here is that she's trustworthy, right? Let's see what we got for prudanes. All the different shades of meaning for prudanes. Sensible, experienced. Yeah, all of that works, okay? This is always my favorite part, is when you're just trying to kind of hammer home the shade of meaning that you want here. And sometimes you can't really get it until you read the whole sentence, and then you go back and go, oh, okay, that's probably the best one. I'm just going to go with wise, just to start, and we'll see if we want to change that. So we could say that the old woman was wise, or we could say she was a wise old woman. Okay? She was a wise old woman. We start this next part with cui. Okay, and thinking back to whatever teacher drilled qui qui quad into your brains, right? Cui, C-U-I, is the dative form. Hicero is in the nominative. Terentia is in the nominative. Okay. Ooh. Did I drop? Am I good? Oh, wise old man, thank you. She was a wise old lady. Thank you very much. Okay. Maddie G with the save. She was a wise old woman. Multis in rebus. So multis in rebus could be dative, could be ablative, but that in there is going to help me out. Okay. So in goes with the ablative. Just a prep phrase. Okay. Cogniti is in that form, that tricky first declension form that could be many things. It could be nominative plural. It could be genitive singular. It could be dative singular. And now, to try to figure it out, you have to start looking around the sentence. So first and foremost, we passed a dative on our way here. Okay? And that cui is talking about the old woman. So having a dative singular feminine kind of feels right. I think we can throw nominative plural out the window because we don't have plural women that we're talking about in this story. So then it comes down to genitive or dative. And the fact that I saw this kui, right, in the dative, I'm gonna go with dative. And we're gonna see how that works out for us. Cognitai is a participle. It means learned, I guess would be the English word. Known. We'll come back to it. Okay. And then we get our adverb here, maxime, which is the superlative of magnopore. And finally, we get our verb confidebant, right? Third plural imperfect. Okay. So when you have these relative clause situations, particularly when they start with a weird case like a dative, don't be intimidated. Just ignore that word and piece the sentence together and then connect the two. So if we just kind of ignore cui, it says et Cicero et Terentia, both Cicero and Terentia. And my verb down here, confidebant, confide in, to trust, right? Maxime here, greatly trusted. Cicero and Terentia, both Cicero and Terentia, greatly trusted whom, right? Or you could think of it as they greatly put their trust in whom, or gave their trust to whom. So confido does not take an accusative. It's a compound verb. It's a verb that goes with dative. So who did they put their trust in? They put their trust in her. Okay? And she, the old woman, is described as cognitai multis in rebus. So she was a wise old man whom both Cicero and Terentia trusted greatly, very greatly, superlative. I'll just say very much, because that's better English. Multis in rebus cognitai. So that cognitai is describing the old woman. She is learned. I mean, does confido take dative? Confido absolutely takes dative. Okay? I mean, something that's cognitus is something that's known, right? But when you're talking about a person, I think the idea here is that she is experienced in many things. I think also the idea here is that she's trustworthy because she's been involved in many things. So she's the old woman whom both Cicero and Terentia trusted very much, who was involved in many things. I think the idea here is that she's got a lot of experience, not with things, but with the family, right? She must be a sort of trusted, long-time member of the family, and that's what I think he's going for here with cognitai. Okay, and that's one of those shade of meaning things that you could argue. Okay, but I interpret it as they trusted her a lot because she was involved in many things in their lives. So if some rando just ran in and said, hey, Cicero, guess what? You got a kid. Like, if it's not somebody that you trust, you might not believe them at first. Okay, or you might doubt what they say. Cum illa, this is another one of those conjunction cums. When illa loquere, we got to go back to our deponents. This is an infinitive. This is an imperative. It looks like an infinitive, loquere, but that verb is deponent, and deponents have some funky looking forms. So you guys might remember a deponent imperative, you get it by taking the second principal part and like undeponenting it. We're going to go with that as a word. Okay. And then we have dixisset. Okay, so we have a subjunctive. I think that's the first one we're seeing. We have third singular. It is pluperfect subjunctive. It doesn't really matter that it's subjunctive. Okay. It is technically a cum clause if we want to identify it as why it is subjunctive. The idea here being the best translation for cum is probably after. Okay. So after ille, Cicero, after Cicero had said loquere, so he says what to the handmaiden? After he had said, speak. Loquere means to speak, so loquere is the command. After he had said speak, or after he said speak, she, okay, aiet, she gives a command of her own, which is quite, unusual. She says gaude, Marque. And that word Marque, his name Marque, is in the vocative case because she's talking directly to him. She's being quite personal with him, quite informal. I don't know exactly what the protocol would be, but for a servant to just kind of speak in imperatives and speak in vocatives and address their master directly might have been a little taboo, but I think you get the sense that this is a servant that is a familiar, right? It's never right, it's never cool, it's always disgusting when you think about it in retrospect. But I think the idea here is that she's very close to Cicero and his wife, so she feels comfortable speaking to them like this. So after he told her to speak, she says, gaude, Marque. She says, rejoice, Marcus. D, which is a shortened form of dei, D propitii. Now, propitious is not a word that we often see in English, but that is the equivalent. So we have third plural perfect here. The gods, the dei, the gods have been propitious. They've been, I don't even know what a synonym for that is in English. They've been good to you, essentially. Favorable. There you go. Sometimes I have to look up the English. My Latin is sometimes better than my English. The gods have been favorable. They've been kind to you. Because mas, which has nothing to do with Spanish, unfortunately, mas tibi filius natus est. So you think of natus est as the verb. It's third person singular. It's another deponent verb. So we have a lot of deponent verbs in this story. Mas, to be honest, the first time I read this story, I had to look it up because I'd never seen the word mas. That's the adjective for masculine. That's the word, that's the word they would use. So it's mas, right? So a mas filius, which feels a little bit redundant, but they're really trying to hammer home the idea that what has happened, the gods have been favorable because a male son, natus est, a male son has been born, tibi, literally has been born to you. Okay, so you could think of that as a dative of, what do they call that? Advantage, almost. It's not really indirect object. It's kind of like it's been a male heir has been born for your benefit, for you. Okay, which of course is very exciting for Cicero. Okay, then we get to this this last chunk here. Yam. Okay, another adverb here. It's still the servant talking. Illum humi, which is actually in the locative case. It's one of the few words that you see in the locative case. Statui, right? First person singular, because she's still speaking. So when she says statui, you probably learned sto state means to stand. It literally says, I have stood him, humi, on the ground. I don't think that's a good translation in English. Yam here means already or just. I have already, I wouldn't say stood him,